Hey everybody, this is Jeremy, and welcome to Turn 0 of Attica's game Aries, where we are going to be playing the Well of Urd, God of Utgard. So, this is a Turn 0. I'm gonna do like a very brief. I say brief. I'll probably talk for 30 minutes or so because I don't actually understand the nature of the word brief. But I'm going to do a little bit of a nation analysis, kind of talk about what I plan to do with the nation. And this is actually after the game is already over. So I'm going to talk a little bit about my concepts going in and then review that objectively from what I've learned about the game after. Okay? So and I'll try to avoid spoilers or anything like that, but I'll use what I have learned in playing Utgard to kind of talk about what I thought going in. Okay? So we're going to go through a little bit of a nation analysis, and then we're going to go into a very brief pretender design, and then that'll be it. Okay, so let's get started. Utgard is a late age nation. So here we are. Utgard, Well of Urd. So Utgard is a land of bitter winters and cool summers. It was once Jotunheim, the home of giants, but with the coming of man, the giant population has dwindled. After man ventured to the icy lands of Jotunheim, the giants of Jotun discovered the humans to be resourceful allies. With the awakening god, all grudges have been cast aside, and men and giants fight side by side. The alliance with the humans has estranged the Gigjas and their Vati servants, who no longer aid the giants. Instead, human seeresses have become influential. In the heart of Utgard lies the magical Well of Urd, where the Norns gather and divine the future of the world. The giants of Utgard are immensely strong and resilient. They are born in the cold and do not suffer from cold climates. The people of Utgard prefer to live in cool provinces. Okay, so this is Jotunheim, and as you can see by the art changes, this is Jotunheim, or this is Utgard, sorry, prior to the changes, prior to the introduction of Vadiheim and the changes to all of the giant nations. And that's actually why I chose to, it's one of the two reasons why I chose to play Utgard. I had originally wanted to play Vadiheim, but they were already picked for this game. So I went with Utgard because I thought it would still be fun to try out some of the giant changes and the new art style and everything like that, and go from there. And then there is a second reason why I really wanted to play it, and that's basically because I hadn't played a big communion nation in multiplayer game, in an established multiplayer game yet, so I wanted to try that out. So, what are the kind of features of Utgard? Utgard, as a race, generally, it's mixed between humans and giants. They tend to be cold resistant. Prefers cold scale 1. Military, they have giant infantry and human infantry. No cavalry. Magic, they cover water, astral, death, blood, and nature. This is really kind of mostly astral and death, honestly, with splashes of nature and water and blood. Okay. Their priests are average, that is to say, the priests are very average. They have Jotun Jarls, which are priest 1s, and then they have Goads, which are priest 2. They have no recruitable H3s. And then they have giant forts as their buildings. So they actually get very good, like they can build very strong fortresses. Okay? Their sites, they have the Well of Urd, which produces 1 death gem, 2 astral pearls, 1 nature gem, and allows the recruiting of the special Norna and Garmherdings. Okay, so let's take a look at their units. We'll go commanders, and then we'll go units. Okay. First off is your bog standard scout. This is literally the same scout that you can find in indie provinces. This is a nothing changed normal scout. Oh, also, I'm going to throw this out there. and I probably should have put this in before 5 minutes into the game, into the discussion. I'm not an expert player in any way, shape, form, or fashion, so you're gonna see me make plenty of mistakes throughout this series, and you're probably gonna see mistakes here in this discussion. But this is just how I have come to understand Utgard. If I said anything wrong, feel free to correct me in the comments. If you know anything or you have any tips or tricks or anything like that, feel free to let me know. Keep in mind, obviously, right, the game is already over. But if I ever play Utgardian, I'll try to remember it. Or if it's just a generic thing, I'll remember it for the next time I do any other nation. So, moving on from the scouts, we have the Jotun scouts, and these guys are actually an interesting combination. So, they're over double the cost, right, gold-wise. And they're not really significantly better stealth-wise. They're actually worse. However, they are still a giant, right? They have giant hit points. They have giant strength, which is interesting because they're actually sacred, okay? So you can actually put a little, if you're running a very heavy bless, you can actually put a little bless on these guys and have them roll around, and it's actually not bad. You can kit them out with some very, like, bland, light thug gear, and they'll do okay. They won't do great. They're not like Vanjarls or anything like that, right? But they can actually manage to do some things because of their giant stats, okay? Then you have the hearses, which are very bog-standard commanders, human hit points, human stats, 60 leadership, nothing grand, okay? Next up is the Jotun Hearse. This is a kind of standard leader or subpar leader, right? Giant stats, is sacred. Again, this is another kind of commander. If you have a good bless, you can throw them out there and do some decent stuff with them. The obviously the caveat being that they can't bless themselves. They're sacred, but they're not priests, right? But if you put like a flask of holy water on them or something like that, it's really easy to keep them. Okay. Other than that, not really inspirational or anything like that. You have your Goad, which is a human priest, both sacred and priest level 1. These guys are basically very cheap workhorses to get, to preach, to actually site search for H1, to put temples up, things like that, but they're not super useful for other things. Again, it goes into that scenario of if you have a really strong bless, you could put some basic gear on these guys. They can bless themselves, but their stats don't really reflect as well as the giant stats do. So that seems very odd. I've heard talk of people trying to get goad thugs to work, and I'm sure there's a way to do it. It's not something that I'm aware of. Next up, we have Jotun goads, and these guys are H2s, and they're much more expensive, but they're much more useful in a lot of different ways. H2 is very useful for a bunch of different things. One, that it is your strongest priest, so if you're going to be using sacreds, these are the guys that you're typically going to be utilizing. They do have much better stats, so you can thug them out quite a bit better. They're pretty expensive for that. They're also kind of crappy leaders at only leadership 40. Okay? But interesting, useful unit. You have your Jotun Jarls. These are your good leaders. Okay, 80 leadership. They could actually do formations. They're really not much different than the Jotun Goads, except they have better leadership, slightly different stats, slightly better stats, and they're Priest 1 rather than Priest 2. And now we get into the. So those are all kind of like meh, whatever, interesting. There's some of those are useful, but now we get into the actual really useful, really unique, interesting portions of Utgard's commanders. The first being the Seath Kona. Okay, these are your low cost mages. Okay, the other two, Scrotty are recruit anywhere. Seath Kona are recruit any fort. Right, Nornas are your capital onlys. Okay, so the Seath Kona are your lesser mages, but they're actually really, really cool. Okay, they're very, very efficient gold wise for the fact that they get 3 paths and they're research 11. Incredibly, if very good researchers, very, very good researchers. And they also have supply bonus 10 and fortune teller. So massing them allows you to move very large giant armies around without really having to worry about supply issues, which is a really fucking cool thing. It's super, super cool. And they communion up to be extremely powerful communions, right? Every single one of these is Astral 1, Death 1, Nature 1, which gets you access in very easy, very cheap, efficient ways to high astral, high death, and high nature in your battles, which is super cool. Not to mention, and this is the second reason why, right? That whole astral communion nation, what I wanted to try to do, or why I wanted to try to play Utgard, right? Is they have things like nether darts, right? They're one of the few nations that can actually easily spam things like nether darts, the astral death crosspath, which is, I think, really interesting, really cool. Okay. But these are amazing mages. There are some obvious downsides to them. They are human, right? They do not have good leadership stats on really anything. They're not sacred, so you can't really boost them up with anything like that, right? They have no protection, abysmal stats, right? Low hit points. So they're amazing mages. They are very, very good, super low morale, 9 morale as a base, right? They're very efficient mages, super good researchers, very interesting with supply bonus, very interesting with fortune teller, right? All really, really cool. But they're fragile as all fuck, which is dangerous. It's very dangerous, right? But that's an interesting, they're very interesting mage unit. They're very, very cool. So, and these are your workhorses. You're going to have, oh, fuck. I kept track of it. I ended up with a lot. And compared to, like, I probably shouldn't have ended up with a lot. So those are the Seath Konas. Next, you have up the Jotun Scrati. Okay. These are shape changers. So these are the ones that can shape change into werewolves or shape change into real wolves. Okay. So very interesting unit. High hit points, very decent stats, right? Attack, defense, precision, those are all decent, but very high strength because they're a giant, right? Magic resistance is a little low, but not horrible, right? Morale is okay. Protections, whatever. But these are Water 1, Blood 2, and they come with a random. And the random is actually extremely important because your paths, when you shape change into a werewolf, your paths are reduced. Okay? Which means that most of the time when you shape change into a werewolf, these guys won't have any water. Unlike earlier age Scrotties, which I think the early age Scrotties from Jotunheim, I think they are all water too. I could be wrong, but I think they're all water too, which means every single one of them can thug super easily with liquid body and quickness and things like that. These guys are not. They do not. Not every single one of them is going to get that, but you do have a 100% chance at one of these randoms. And if you get a water 2, that's a great thug, right? If you get a blood 3, that's going to be very useful for other things. The death and the nature is less useful, but you can use them to do some things here or there, okay? But the Scrati are extremely important because they are your blood access, okay? They're going to be your blood access. They're going to be your blood hunters. They're also potential thugs, right? Even if you don't have, even if they're not water 2, they're still thuggable in their werewolf form because they still have regeneration in their werewolf form innately. So that's very good. But they're chock full of downsides. And some of those downsides include, again, they're not sacred. You're going to notice a big thing with Utgard is a lot of their most powerful units aren't sacreds, which is kind of a weird thing to deal with, right? So the Scrati aren't sacreds. They have a very weird path scenario that's hard to rely on, and they're very expensive, and they're recruitment 4, right? So you're gonna want a lot of these because you're gonna want them blood hunting. You're gonna want them as, and another very big thing with them is these are your, so Seath Konas, right? They're gonna be your communion slaves in the beginning of the game, right? But eventually, you don't want Seath Konas to be communion slaves. You want Scrati to be communion slaves. You want Scrati to be your turbo communion slaves as werewolves because they naturally have regeneration. And then you can do other things, like if you take a regeneration bless, you can put shrouds on them so that they are always regenerating. Even more, you can put rings of regeneration on them so they have 30% regeneration. You can do a lot of different things, and that's makes them extremely effective turbo communion slaves. Like you can have 4 to 8 Scrati turbo communion for 20 masters, or something along those lines. Right? You can do a lot, and they're very, very valuable. 176 upkeep cost per year, though, means that unless business is booming, they are hard to keep up, and every single one of them is slow to recruit. It's going to take a long time to get them up to where you want them. But this is an incredibly powerful unit, incredibly important unit. Next up, we have the Nornas, right? Okay, so these are your capital-only mages, and they're basically just super Seath Konas. They're Seath Konas that have lived long enough to become Nornas, basically. So they are every single one of them is Astral 2, Death 2, Nature 1, with a random, 100% Astral, Death, Nature, or Blood. The Blood can be very, very useful. Actually, all of these can be pretty useful, but the Blood is probably the most useful because it's a splash of blood for your Nornas into your communions. That way you don't have to use the Scrati in your communions, okay, as a master, right? Because every Scrati that you have to use that isn't a slave means you need another Scrati to take that place. The Nornas are very, very useful. But they, almost worse than the Seath Konas, have abysmal stats, and they're old, right? They're old age, so they have worse map move. But they do also have Spirit Sight, and they have Death Curse. Okay? The Nornas are pretty interesting because with their random chances, they're going to allow you to climb higher in Astral, Death, and Nature. If you get an Astral, right, that's an Astral 3, you can put a Skull Cap, a Starshine Skull Cap on them, and then they're Astral 4, right? And if you set yourself up correctly, you can do something like a Crystal Coin, suddenly they're Astral 5. Nornas can climb decently high in Astral, okay? Just off of a 1 random. If you get super lucky and you get a 2 random, super yay, awesome, right? You get a 1 random on a Death, and suddenly this is a Death 3 mage, right? You can give them a Skull Staff, and they're a Death 4 mage. You can boost, and then they're a Death 5, and then they can make a Skull Helmet, or whatever it is, a Skull Face, right? And then they're Death 6, or you can do, if you're high in Astral, or you have access to Sorcery, or things like that, you can skip the boost and do it that way. But Nornas can, again, get you high in Death. Similar scenario with Nature, though it's harder, right? But if you get a Nature random, you can go for a Thistle Mace. They can make Moonvine bracelets, right? Very easily. So you have a Thistle Mace into a Moonvine bracelet, and then your Nature 4, right? You can go into a couple of different directions from that. So Nornas are very important. They're you're not going to have very many of them, because it doesn't, again, not sacred, so very expensive, not quite as expensive as your Scratis, but still very expensive, slow to recruit, capital only. So you're not going to have a lot of them, but the ones that you have, you're going to be fishing for randoms, and they're going to be very important to you. Okay? So, Those are your commanders. Units. I'm not gonna spend ages going through all the units, but I will. I'll go through each one very quickly, and then I'll highlight a couple that I think are very important. Okay. Huskarls, basic humans, whatever. They have javelins. Good to mass for javelins. Same thing for this Huskarl. It's just a spear variety instead of the axe variety. I tend to prefer the axe variety because it hits significantly harder. But the spear variety can be good for repelling, whatever. Either of these are just useful because they have a bunch of javelins. But we don't really care about them because of other things. This is a Gaudy Huskarl, which is a better statted Huskarl, but without a javelin, just an axe. Actually, not bad. They have decently high protection, but I tend to prefer other things, so I try not to use these very much. Another human Gaudy Huskarl. This is the spear instead of the axe variant. Again, I would go with the axe variant. It hits harder, but if you're trying to repel, whatever. Then you have the human herdmen, which are slightly better than the Gaudy Huskarls stat-wise, and they have a sword instead of the axe or spear. I actually dislike these compared to both the axe and spear variants. They're slightly better stat-wise, but they are more in gold and resources and recruitment. At 13, 22, 16, you have 10, 20, 9. So I don't really like herdmen very much. They do take buffs a little bit better, I think, in general. But whatever. Next up, we have the Jotun Bondi, right? And I do apologize in advance because you're going to hear me say Jotun and Jotun interchangeably a whole bunch. Whoops. Throughout this series. The Bondi are not very great. They're kind of like Gaudy Huskarls, the human Gaudy Huskarls, in that they just have an axe attack. They do have giant stat points, so if you're just trying to mass giants, they can be decently fine. But I would rather go for other giants, like a Jotun Javelinist. So, these guys are basically the same as the Bondi, except they have javelins, and they have 2 of these things, and they hit for 23 freaking damage at range 21. Because they're giants, so they can throw these things super fucking far. And this is bread and butter. As far as my opinion goes, these are bread and butter for Utgard, right? Because if you mass these, if you get like 10, 15 of these, they can take on most indie provinces, because if their javelin hits something, it's going to kill that something. And whatever is trying to hit them back is typically not going to kill them. Even heavy cav, right, running up against 10 to 15 javelinists are going to die to the javelin. And then when they charge, as long as they hit properly, they're not going to kill very many javelinists before they axe them a question and the knights are all dead. The heavy cav are all dead, right? So these are super efficient units, very good for what they do, very good cost for what they do. This is the unit that I expand with, that I mass. And even to the point to where, like, I will say this, I make the mistake of swapping away from javelinists way too soon. And I do this in many games. I've played a bunch of Utgard single-player games while playing this game, just to test things out and have fun with it. Because I do that with a lot of multiplayer games. I'll pick a nation and I'll be like, yeah, I'm super excited to play the nation, but you know how multiplayer games are. They're only like one turn every 2 days, that type of scenario, once things get rolling. And then you're like, I want to play now. So I'll play a bunch of single-player games to kind of like get my fill. But the javelinists are extremely valuable, and so I'll just go ahead and say it. So the Gaudy Huskarls are kind of like their upgraded counterparts, but they cost more in every way. And I think there's definitely a place, an issue with swapping over to Gaudy Huskarls too soon. That's something that'll come up. Anyway, so these guys are great. Next up is the Spearmen, which they have very good protection, And they are length 4 spears, so these guys are actually really good at repelling, and there's nothing wrong with them. It's just at the end of the day, I would rather have a javelin than just a spear. But these guys are really good if you're gonna, especially if you're gonna like buff them up or you got a plan. They're good. Okay. And you'll notice, right? I haven't really been talking about this, but all of them are susceptible to shock, cold resistant, and have snow move. That's just like, that's the trait of the giants, is susceptible to shock, cold resistant, snow move. So the axemen are basically the same as the spearmen. I actually, in this instance, right, I kind of favor the spearmen over the axemen in the Jotun variant, because the spearmen already hit for 24 damage, and if you're going to be buffing them, they're going to be hitting for even more. Having a 29 damage is rare that seems to matter, right? That's a stupid statement, right? Hitting harder is always important. But I think what I'm trying to say is, at this point, a 5-point difference to me, when you're dealing 24 damage versus you're dealing 29 damage, that can definitely matter in certain situations. But I think it's at that point, the 5-point damage difference is more made up for by the weapon length and the repel chance comparatively. So that's just something. But your mileage will probably vary distinctly. Jotun hurlers. Okay, so these guys are interesting. They're kind of like a different ranged option from the javelinists. They have kind of abysmal stats, but they, compared to other giants, but they do throw a boulder, and they have 2 of these boulders that hit really, really hard, but it's super low length. But you can like put them in a little line behind the rest of your line, and then they'll hurl these big ass boulders into melee, and it'll fuck people up. It really will. However, I don't like them compared to the other options, and I find that more often than not, I just don't use them. I don't know that I actually get any this whole game. Okay, moving on. We got Jotun Huskarls. This is an upgraded version of what we've already seen, which is the Jotun Axemen. I say upgraded version. I think it's upgraded stat-wise, yeah. So the Axemen have better protection, which I think is more valuable, but they have weaker stats compared to the Huskarls. The Huskarls have better defense, better attack, etc. And they also come with bodyguard, which can be decently useful. But if you were going to try to go for this, I would always go for the Gaudy Huskarls. And these are kind of like the upgraded Jotun Javelinists. And this is what I think is the other really good unit for Utgard. They have higher protection than the Javelinists do. They have slightly better stats. And they also have the Javelins with bodyguard. So these guys are basically just upgraded Javelinists, Jotun Javelinists, and they are more expensive in every single way. But I think they're very useful. I think there's a point at which your economy can transition over to Gaudy Huskarls instead of Javelinists, and they do a very good job. So, moving on from them, we have the Herdmen. These are expensive units. These are the upgrade to the human Herdmen. I think they're kind of, I don't want to say useless, right? But I think there's not a lot of point in them compared to other ones. They're very expensive, resource-wise, gold-wise. They have good protection, sure, but what you're getting for that isn't... You could just get a Gaudy Huskarl with a javelin and slightly worse protection. And what, like 1 less attack skill, 1 less defense. I don't think it's worth grabbing the Herdman, and it's honestly probably, it'd be better just to grab, you can almost get 2 Javelinists. You can probably get 3 Javelinists for every, not even probably, you can get 3 Javelinists and some change for every 2 Herdmen you get. So you get 6 massive Javelins flying at your face for 2 of these guys. It's not worth it. And then the last thing you get is these Garmherdings, okay? And these are, oh, finally, we get Sacreds. Now, these guys are actual badasses. If you go a pretty intense bless, these guys will fucking carry you. They're very low resource cost, very chunky recruitment cost. 55 gold is pretty hefty, but they have good hit points, great strength. They have a battle axe. They hit incredibly hard. They're berserker too. And if you bless them, they'll beat the shit out of things. They will absolutely beat the shit out of things. They have a little bit, depending on what bless you go, right? If you don't go a defensive bless, like if you don't go regeneration or hard skin or something like that, they have maybe not hard skin, maybe more like a bark skin or something like that. Get their natural protection up to 10. I don't know, whatever. There are a couple of different routes you can go, but if you don't go a defensive bless, their attrition rates are kind of high. They're not the most. They definitely go to the motto of the best defense is a good offense, right? They can't hurt us if we chop them in half before they do anything. But realistically, that doesn't work. That doesn't work very well. If you play Dominions a bunch, you find out that defense tends to be better than offense. If you cannot die, or if you cannot be hurt, or if you're just hurt significantly less, then normally you're going to kill way more than you are going to be killed. But Garmherdings are a very interesting point in that discussion, right? They hit incredibly hard, and if you give them a little bit of a defensive bless, that attrition rate goes way down, and they're incredibly dangerous. So, that is basically Utgard. So, there are a couple of other things to talk about with Utgard, but I'm not going to go incredibly in-depth into them. Again, this isn't intended to be a super in-depth nation analysis. I'm assuming most people who are watching this are going to understand. If you're looking for a more in-depth nation analysis, please do go check out any of the people who do that, Lucid or General Confusion or something like that. They're going to be much better at explaining the pros and cons of the nation to you. This is just my general kind of like viewpoint. But let's jump over to Pretender design. All right. This is it. This is our Pretender, the Well of Urd, the Fountain of Blood. So what have I done here? What am I trying to do with Utgard? This is an incredibly cheap Pretender, right? Blood 5, strong vitae, blood surge. Really, all this is I wanted to go, and this is dangerous, right? I wanted to go scales Utgard. These are all almost perfect scales. We went +2 in cold for a number of reasons, things like ill winter or just taking advantage of our natural protection against cold. We went very high dominion. The whole point, though, of this is I wanted to make use of our Seathkona's efficiencies, right? So Magic 3, they're going to be amazing researchers, right? And I wanted my lands to be the most lush and fertile cold ass lands in existence, because I wanted to mass produce a crazy amount of giants and a crazy amount of Seathkonas and go bonkers with it. And honestly, this is not. I think it's a perfectly doable idea. Truth be told, why did we go Death 5? We went to Fountain of Blood and Death 5 because I think late game blood is one of the strongest things in the game, and it can be difficult to climb with just the Scrotty. It's definitely doable, right? Because you can get a random Scrotty to be a blood 3, and then you can go up from there. But a Fountain of Blood at blood 5 would allow me to get up there more easily, basically. would allow me to not have to worry about jumping through as many hoops while climbing things. So that's the general concept with the Fountain of Blood. And also, again, it's just a very bland, very bland scenario because I wanted to go full scales. Okay? Blood Surge allows our Garm Herdings, the limited amount that we use, to be a little more killy. Strong Vitae is literally just a spare because this is the balance that I didn't have to go Blood 5, but balancing it out at Blood 5 ended up working better point-wise. Like I could spend more of my points if I did this rather than doing something else. That being said, right, there are a number of downsides to this, and I'm gonna call out the one that is the most obvious and gonna be an issue. Is I have no magic weapons in Utgard, right? None. So my Garm Herdings are not gonna have magic weapons, and I know this is a problem. I knew this was a problem going into the game. It was a risk that I was taking. But my reasoning, and I definitely think it's poor reasoning now that I've gone through the game, right? My reasoning was that I was going to have a lot of mages, right? A bunch of communions. I was going to have a bunch of astral magic. I was going to have a bunch of death magic. And that I would probably be able to deal with anything ethereal that I needed to deal with through that, right? Through a combination of utilizing chaff, right, to hold people back, and utilizing things like Soul Slay to just straight out kill things. That was the idea. That in combination with the fact that if I needed to, right, I can always put together scrawny thugs with basic gear, right, like ice brands or frost brands rather, and stuff like that to be able to cut through large swaths of people if need be, right? Thug the shit out of some people. So that was the secondary concept, right? Like I'm gonna have a bunch of mages, so that should help, and I'm gonna have these pretty good thugs, so that should be okay, right? That should mean that I don't have to rely on magic weapons. That is not the case. Always take magic weapons. If you do not have magic weapons, you do not have weapons that are magical. Get magic weapons. I say this to myself every single time I play a game, and then every time I play a game that I convince myself not to worry about it. And this just so happens to be a game that I played at the same time as another game I had the same issue in. Right? I convinced myself in both games that, no, it'll be fine, right? Like, I have other things that can carry me. It'll be okay. And each time, both times, it has turned into a, nope, if you had magic weapons, this would not be as much of an issue as it is. So that's a little bit spoilery, but I think it's less spoilery and probably just a known, right? Like anyone looking at this is going to be able to go, oh, Utgard, you have no magic weapons. What are you going to do? So, we'll see. We'll find out. This is the Well of Urd, God of Utgard. Another thing. So, I haven't really talked about this, but this is I said at the beginning of this, but this is Attica's game Aries, right? So this is one of the games run by Attica on another channel, or on his channel. He collects all of the turn files and then he pieces them together and shows a holistic approach of kind of like going through every turn, showing what everyone's doing, which is a crazy, awesome, super cool way to see Dominions. I honestly think it's probably don't get me wrong, I got into Dominions by watching people like Lucid or General Confusion or Perun or things like that, people like that, making videos about Dominions. But I honestly think that the approach that Attica has taken over the last several months, right, is probably the best way that I've ever watched Dominion. Being able to see what's going on is so incredibly interesting and cool, and being able to like get this viewpoint, this omniscient presence, is amazing. It's so incredibly cool. So, if you have not checked out those videos, absolutely go check out Attica's videos. They're amazing. And this is one of those games. So this is going to be an individual viewpoint from within one of those games, and yeah, so that's pretty much it. I also will be kind of semi-role-playing in this game. I'm not going to be taking it too far or anything like that, but in my messaging, because this is a anonymous, in-game diplomacy only game, I'm going to be kind of like ratcheting up the role play as far as messaging goes. There's a couple of fun things going on that will be a part of the overall production of this series. So I hope you enjoy that. If not, it's okay. No big deal. But yeah, I think that's about it. Yeah. I said this was going to be brief. It's like a 40-minute video. Okay, I'm just going to cut it here. So that is going to be turn 0 for the Aries game, and I'll see you all next time. Bye, everybody.